Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Western United States Pipe Band Association Ensemble Seminar. Today we're going to focus on the adjudication exam to prepare for the ensemble test. And I would like to thank Bob Worrell. This is the seminar that was instigated a few years ago, and he's the one who prepared it initially. And so it's evolved from that point in time, but it started with him, and I certainly want to give him credit for it. We'll be following a format. We've got a handout here that you should follow along as we go. On the handout, it's got the overall agenda. Let's just take a look at it and we'll go through it. First of all, we're going to talk about the purpose, why we're here, what the point of it is, a little bit about the background on it. And then we're going to clarify the concept of ensemble. It turns out that ensemble has 4 components as opposed to the piping 3 or the drumming 3. We have the tonal integration between the 3 cores. We have the technical integration between the 3 cores. We have the musical integration between the 3 cores, but in addition we have the quality and musicianship of the arrangement. This is the specific task that's added on to the ensemble judge's work during the contest. And although the other judges can certainly comment on this as it impacts their specialties, it's the ensemble judge who's responsible to definitely comment upon it. Later, we're going to take a quick look at the adjudication sheet. We are not going to be doing the practice sheet writing, but we'll speak about that later, about the differences between what an ensemble sheet might be from a piping sheet or a drumming sheet. And then it's going to be up to you to get some band performances and practice writing, because that's definitely a component of the test. So, as we go through it, what you'll notice is that there is some definitions in here, and I'll be referring to those definitions. Part of understanding ensemble judging is to understand the vocabulary that is associated with it. And so you want to spend a little bit of time in preparation to know the vocabulary, so with a view that you can use it intelligently and communicate clearly with the bands and other adjudicators about these kinds of issues. As we go through it, there's a space to make some notes as we go about the various components, the tonal component, the technical component, the musical component, and the arrangement. So you can take notes as you go, and I'm trying to prepare you for the exam, and so this is going to become a useful thing for you to study along with the DVD. So let's get started. So the purpose of ensemble judging came out of an initial need in Scotland. There was good piping and drumming, but poor ensemble. So the question was, what was wrong? What was missing? Out of this kind of initial need, the MAP program, well, what is it called? The Musical Appreciation Program came out to build ensemble in grade 4 playing through the march medley and so forth, and now it's being built up through a WUSPBA reel playing too. So the idea is building this idea of ensemble, the whole band, as opposed to the 2 cores that happen to be playing together. Now also we're considering the visual component, which is the midsection component. Both the voicing that comes from the midsection and the visual aspect of it, and so we can see that ensemble is a progressive thing. It's an increasing thing, and today in the Western United States Pipe Band Association, we have these tests, and so we're preparing for the ensemble test specifically today. But we're also educating band leaders regarding ensemble with a view to clarify the concept and improve performances of the 2 cores playing together, 3 cores playing together, if you think of it as 3 ways. And when we're going through, this is the single biggest idea about ensemble, is that there are these 4 components to it. And if you had, one way to think of it as we go through today is if you were imagining an ensemble, you had 4 ensemble judges, this is a good way to kind of move your way around between the ideas. So if you have a tonal integration judge, what are you thinking about in terms of the tones and the sounds coming from the band? You're thinking of the pipe sound, you're thinking of the snare sound, you're thinking of the midsection sound, and how they integrate and work together. As we go through each of these 4 components, there's going to be a kind of a 5-star literally 5 stars next to an idea, which is sort of the ensemble's overriding decision maker, okay, the ensemble judge. Since you have piping judges who are listening to the intricacies of the pipe corps, and you have drumming judges which are listening to the intricacies of the drum corps, It's the ensemble judge who's got to look at the integration between the cores. Okay? And so this initial idea of the intercore playing versus the intra-core playing. So you have to get that part of the vocabulary correct. Intra means within the core, so within the pipe core, within the snare core, within the midsection, okay? Versus intercore, where you're playing between the cores, between the pipe core and the snare core, between the snare core and the midsection, between the midsection and the pipe core. This is the key component, the key business that the ensemble judge is listening for, and what makes it a challenge to be an ensemble judge. The way I remember the difference is I think of interstate highways. Interstate means between states, between cores. That means that the other one, intra, must be within the core itself, okay? So please, let's get that vocabulary straight. It's one of the kind of initial new kind of vocabulary you have to watch out for on the ensemble exam. Where we have sound, okay, tonal integration, we also have technical integration. And so this is the, we used to call execution. Now it's maybe a synonym, technical integration in the technique between the embellishments that are being played in the drum cores, in the pipe cores. Third component, musical integration. So this is the so-called expression of how they're playing. How the initial pipe melody perhaps is set itself, and the interpretation that the drum corps is adding to it, okay, supporting it, making it an exciting musical performance overall. Well integrated together, that's what you're looking for. And then the musical arrangement, the fourth component, that's the component where the actual score that is developed allows space, allows time for these musical events to be happening. And so you kind of want to have a score where there's not everyone is playing intensely all the time. Some of the cores will be taking a forefront, and some might be sitting in the background to provide the kind of a setting to have an exciting musical performance. So if the pipe corps is doing something very intricate and so forth, the drumming could be following that, or they could be backing off and allowing that to shine. Similarly, if you have a pipe corps playing something that's rather kind of slow, maybe the drum corps can reflect that, or maybe that's a feature for maybe a mid-section event to happen that's an attractive musical piece. All right. Let's look at the four components in more detail. All right, tonal integration. So on our handout, okay, you'll see that we have some definitions. And one of the first definitions, actually the first definition is beyond the ensemble definition. Ensemble is a French word which means together. And when you're evaluating the ensemble, you're evaluating the whole band. The act of assessing the pipe band performance of as a musical whole. So you want to put the whole thing all together, and that's your overall view. As you're doing your judging, you're going to shift your view around from one core to the other. Part of it is distinguishing intonation from pitch. Okay, maybe I can get some help here. How would you distinguish intonation from pitch?
Pitch is more absolute. The pitch can be measured. We have tuning meters that can measure pitch. While you might argue whether something should be sharper or flatter, as far as what is pleasant to the ear, once you decide upon a pitch, everything else about the chanter or the drones or the drums keys into that, what you've decided is the pitch. Whereas intonation has to do more with being able to maintain the pitch, all the elements that go into creating a steadiness of tone, such as blowing, such as impacts that the drums may have, tuning the drums. I suppose if you hit a bass drum harder, it can change pitch. So intonation has to do more with the dynamics of maintaining that pitch.
Okay, so the ensemble judge is the one who has to assess the pitch of all of the piping as well as the drums. And then let's talk a little bit about intonation of the drums. Okay, I know that being a piper myself who has some drumming background but primarily piping background, I've had to get myself to educate myself on the drumming side of it to become a better ensemble judge so that I can communicate meaningfully with the drummers in the band through my ensemble sheet. And so, how would you intonate a drum? Okay, let's hear from some people thinking if we set the pitch, and maybe frequently like the pipers use the meter now to maybe set pitches or check pitches, and certainly our ear is involved as well. And then the drum corps may have a person or persons who are tuning the drums, okay, in a way. What would be some changes if the pitch is set deliberately? Then what would be some things would be intonation differences for drumming? Let's talk about drumming specifically.
Pitch-wise, as far as in relation to piping, you know, a lot of the tenor drums are tuned to notes specifically on the chanter. You know, and also those drums would be played sort of simultaneously with keys that the pipe tunes are in. You know, how a tenor drum is struck, you know, the tuning of it is one thing. How it is struck can also really affect the pitch. You know, how they stand is another thing. You know, tenor drums, you stand forward, the sound could be affected coming off the back as opposed to off the top of the drum. As far as snare drum pitch, you know, people have opinions on that. Really has no bearing to chanter pitch at all. A pleasing sound is good. You know, you want something sharp with some resonance, response, stuff like that. But as far as pitch goes and the integration between the sections, tenor drums play a huge role now doing that.
So what about the intonation of the snare drum, let's say? How would you say if you were listening to a drummer, would it be something visually that you would see that would be the intonation, or would it be like something to do with stick height or hitting the drum at one location or another? Is there something that you could...
The actual sticks can affect it themselves. You know, you can have
grip.
Yeah, how they hold it. You know, people who have a looser grip allows the stick to sort of ring at a higher pitch. You know, the playing of it. Most of it comes with the setup of the drum before it's even played. And then a couple factors playing off the snare will really affect it. If a head blows in the middle of competition, you're going to have an immediate issue with sound. Yeah. You know? Yeah.
Okay, so let's just deal with the midsection too. We need to move ourselves around between the three sections always. This is one of the challenges of ensemble consideration. On a bass drum, let's talk about, is the angle of the stick hitting the drum, does that affect intonation? Would you say?
I would say yes.
I would say yes.
If you hit directly into it, it could bring the pitch up. If you graze across it, it might not sound at all. For that matter, it may not resonate at all to be heard in this at all. So there's lots of ways depending on where you hit the head. If you hit it in the dead center, it doesn't resonate properly. If you hit it slightly off, it resonates a little bit more. There's lots of considerations. If you have harder mallets, it affects the pitch, it affects the intonation. If you have softer mallets, it has a different sound.
So the reason I'm spending some time with the drumming is because one of the essentials of the drum corps and ensemble is this dynamic range that they can offer. Whereas the pipers can stress certain notes and sustain certain notes longer, the drummers have the advantage of actually have two capabilities. They have an accenting capability and they have a greater dynamic range, so they can play soft and loud. And as they change, that's an intonation issue too. And so it's an important part to know when you're an ensemble judge, to be paying attention to the intonation of the pipes. The pipes we talked about in the other seminar, more distinctly the piping seminar, obviously, where you may be blowing too hard. Maybe at the start you're anxious and you're overblowing, and so you're blowing the pitch that you had set and were comfortable with when you relaxed standing being tuned. Then you get overexcited and you overblow, and so the pitch rises, and so the intonation is poor, okay? Similarly, you may have a reed that's too hard and you're managing the reed at the start of the the medley, let's say, but 4 minutes in, all of a sudden that you're fatigued, and so your pressure's dropping, and so the intonation goes flatter. Okay, so these are the types of things that can happen on the piping side. But on the drumming side, those are real too. So how you grip the stick, where you hit the drum, how you hit the drum, with what you're hitting the drum, all affects intonation. And as a byproduct of that, this affects the dynamic range and the kinds of accenting that you're trying to get to contribute to the overall musical show. In terms of tuning, okay, there's functionalistic versus coloristic. And so let's look at these kind of ideas. The functionalistic tends to be something when you have extreme precision and clarity on the tuning. There are bands that pay close attention to having the exact number, as it were, okay? And these offer a very incredibly closely tuned sound, very clear. There's a different philosophy or a different way of thinking of it in terms of a coloristic way, which is less precise, but a little bit broader range of pitch, which offers sort of a richer kind of sound. If you go back in time, pre-synthetic reeds, pre-tuners, pre-use of any kind of tape on chanter holes, it was exclusively a coloristic world, or it was dominantly a coloristic world, let's put it that way, where you were blending the sound to have a pleasing sound, and it sounded good. It was not necessarily high precision, right? So today you're able to get that high precision. You can adjust the tape, you can manipulate the reed, you can use the tuner, you have devices that cause constant blowing and that kind of thing. And so you could have a group that's tuning more functionalistically versus a group that's tuning more coloristically. I think the top bands, the best bands, have their feet in both camps. Okay? So in the drumming side, functionalistic, I don't know, would we say the drummers are using a meter for their drums? Some people are. So you would say that those people would be on the functionalistic side, whereas the people who are perhaps not doing it would be more a coloristic. They're doing what's pleasing to their ear, what blends nicely with the pipe core, and they would be making an adjustment by ear to make it sound better. You know, that's the two camps. As a judge, you want to be comfortable with both camps, and so you want to appreciate. It's nice to appreciate what's going on both sides of it. Bob?
Yeah, what Ed pointed out in the drumming seminar this morning was that the snares pitch is indefinite versus the tenor bass, which is definite. Mm-hmm. So it's another way of saying the one is coloristic, the snares, versus the functionalistic tenors mm-hmm. and bass.
A part of this is timbre or timbre. If you're from Scotland, you say timbre. Is that right? You say timbre, you say timbre. If you're a French speaker, I don't know. Never come to that? Bob Shepard says timbre. It's the quality of the sound. And so we have, say, a tenor drum pitched to a note on the chanter. It has a different timbre than the note on the chanter itself. So it's at the same pitch, but it has a different quality sound, and so that's what you're talking about in the timbre. When you're talking about the quality of sound of the various instruments, you want to make reference to this kind of thing. On the judge's sheet itself, in the piping side, words like thin and full sound, okay, versus a thin sound, those are words that refer to timbre, okay? On the drumming side, what kinds of words might we have about the snare drum that indicate the timbre of the drum?
It could be thin, it could be dull, it could be choked. Mm-hmm. It could be
flat overall.
It could be crisp.
And I've heard references to the crisp in terms of the actual snare action off the snare drum. When we're communicating in our sheet about this, we want to use these kinds of words that are specific to meaning, and that way we can, if you talk about making an adjustment, if it's a band that you think wants more snare sound, then you can talk about making an adjustment on the snares to get more snare sound and therefore have a crisper sound. I know that when the snares are, perhaps for instance, when the top snare is not in action, that you get a kind of a pinging ring off that top head. And so things like that affect the timbre of the. If we talk about the bass drum, of course, is huge in terms of the timbre of the drum. What are some kinds of things that might be happening in a bass drum? What would you be thinking about in terms of hearing a bass drum? What kind of effect would you say? What are we looking for? Are we looking for a kind of a deep, rich sound that...
Maybe the attack overall, just the initial attack, or the resonance of the sustain of the note, possibly.
So it's possible to sustain too long, okay? And is it possible to be too short? With kind of a dull, kind of pillow-like, it doesn't resonate at all. And so somewhere in between is an acceptable range of sound. And you, as the ensemble judge, are going to be interpreting what that is. And in a view from the drumming judge is doing an interpretation based within the drum corps, okay, the intra corps. Your task is to look at the whole band and the inter-corps appreciation and how that bass drum fits within the integration of the whole musical unit. And so I believe the timbre has a lot to do with it on the bass side. All right. Now on the piping side, we know that, and I guess in all sides, that increased numbers of players have a positive effect. So in the overall sound of the band, the quality of the sound, if you have more players, it makes it broader, richer. When you see a band that has a fewer number of players, what tends to happen is that individuals tend to stick out, or individuals become dominant. For instance, if we have a drum corps with a 2 snare drummer corps, then the timbre of the snare line itself, things like the roll quality, aren't as dense as a corps that would have more players. And so I think that has an effect, which is a positive effect if you have more drummers with more matched drums, obviously. Then you get a richer timbre. In the pipe corps, it's the same way. If you have a pipe corps with 6 pipers versus 12 pipers, I think there's a difference there between them, and it's a positive effect to have more players. If you have a higher pitch, then that tends to have a negative effect on the timbre, okay? There's more risks, it's more difficult to control, the higher notes tend to disappear, and the high A, high G, that kind of thing, they tend to drop out. Higher pitch on the drumming side, what happens on a snare drum if the pitch is too high? What would you say?
It gets thinner and you lose dynamic range.
Less dynamic range possibility from the low to the high. What about a higher pitch in the midsection?
Less resonance.
Less resonance?
Yeah, because you have to pull the heads tighter, so therefore they don't vibrate as much.
So that would
they don't
imply...
project as far away from the source of the sound.
So to get the volume, you'd have to hit it harder, and that would probably be a negative thing.
Yeah. You can get smaller drums, then you might lose sort of volume. You know, the smaller head. With a bigger drum, to crank it up to a higher pitch, the heads would have to be very tight. And then you would obviously lose some of the resonance of it. But overall, the higher you go, you start losing some of that sustain on the notes. Yeah.
Weak reeds have a negative effect too. Once again, if you have a weak reed, then it tends to be more difficult to intonate, and so therefore it's more susceptible to changes in blowing pressures and the weather. Okay. Other comments on impact of timbre on the tonal integration. Remember that we're standing back, we're envisioning ourselves as the tonal integration judge. This is one component. And as you look at these things that we've been talking about here are all components of it. And so you're trying to get a view of it from the whole band perspective. You're moving around the band if you can, listening to the tone of the piping, listening to the tone of the snare drumming, listening to the midsection as it flows over the 2 cores. What other kind of aspects of timbre, or are there other aspects of timbre that comes into play?
I think it was alluded to, and that is the positioning of various members, particularly of the drum corps, and particularly the midsection, because sometimes you see them turned around different ways, but how the sound is projecting off of the drums, and if the pipes are typically in a circle, but as you move around the circle, you can get different different tonal balance and pick up some different qualities of sound.
I think that's a wonderful thing to talk about a little bit more. As you move around the band, particularly we can just envision it with the bass drum, if you're listening on the side where the bass drum is perpendicular to where you are, it's different than listening up at the head where it's head on. And so as you move yourself around, then you can get kind of a full picture of what the overall sound of the band is. I don't know if you stay in one location, then you're going to get obviously one location viewpoint. So I think it's a good thing to move around to hear it. I don't know that you move around to hear it to get to a place where it's the best sounding, or should you move in a regular pattern, as you move around. I don't know. That's one of the things you have to decide. It's difficult. You have to walk and write and walk and write and walk and write. You want to move your ear around between the cores so that you're consciously doing that. Sometimes you can get drawn in to a pipe core or a midsection or a snare core, and you get drawn in, you realize that you're really only listening to one piece of it. So it's a good idea tonally to move yourself physically around so that you can hear it from different points of view. The pitch sounds different on the bass drum, let's say, from one position to another. The tenors, same way. If there's some intricate tenor voicing that's going on, to be in one location, you'll hear it one way. To be in a different location, you hear it a different way. And so getting your way around the band, I think, is a positive thing. The pitches themselves should blend and create no discord. All right, I think that's fairly clean. The snares with the midsection, the pipes and the drums. The volume should be balanced, pipes to drums. And so if you have physically a large core, a very large pipe core, a small snare line, very huge midsection versus small pipe core and that kind of thing, then the issue of balance seems to be very, very significant. So it's going to be your task to say, when you see a band that comes out with one of the three cores large, are they balancing their sound, or is it kind of dominant one to the other? And if you think of it in terms of a triangle, okay, an equilateral triangle, with usually it's pipes at the top of the triangle and percussion at the bottom, and the percussion is supporting and enhancing the overall pipe melody, okay? Is that the way it is, or is it switched around the other way where now it's really the snares on the top and the pipes and midsection are contributing to the snare line in a dominant way? Or is it the midsection? Is the midsection so large and dominant that it's really the midsection that you're hearing over all the others, and the pipes and the snare line are secondary? That's a different the equilateral triangle with the three cores is one way to think of it, in terms of if the pipe is offering the melody and the drums are contributing to that melody in some way, syncopating with it, offering counter rhythms to it from time to time. But in terms of the balance of the sound, is it balanced? That's what you want to think about. Maybe there's some suggestions people have. What are some things that you do if by chance you have one core with a larger number of players than the others? What can you do if you have a very large pipe core and a drum snare line that's perhaps undermanned?
I think I'm not really sure that having a large midsection would really be. I mean, you could have 20 of them. Generally, they only play one at a time, anyways. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you'll have 20 tenor drummers, just for a total exaggeration for to make a point. But having only one play at a time, no matter what, anyways, there could be 50 of them. It would look really ridiculous, but essentially it shouldn't have anything to do with the overall blend. And you could have two tenor drummers, and they could be beating the heck out of them and really throw off the balance. And then at the same time, the quality of sound when they're attacking the drum very loudly, it would just make visually look really weird, but I don't think it should have any negative effect if they're playing the right stuff
If
together.
they're taking turnabout in the midsection, or if they're not playing at all in the midsection, or if you have a midsection that, say everyone's doing a double time J motion, it can become a thumping rhythm, whether there's only one of them or 20 of them doing that. So because the drumming has a dynamic range, if you're paying attention to that, then you can, the number isn't so much the driving force as how hard you're hitting the drum. Yeah. Now in the snare drum, what about that? If you only have, say, and it is a common experience that you go and you have a grade 4 drum corps, let's say, that only has 2 drummers, and maybe they have 8 pipers, something like that. What about the balance there? Is there a way to balance 2 drummers with the 8, if they're exceptionally strong drummers in the same way that we talked about the midsection playing, or is that just problematic?
I think it might be just a little bit problematic, honestly, because you don't want the change in the way they play to try to balance against a bigger pipe corps, because then it changes. They might get the louder sound, but they would change everything else about what is good about their playing to accomplish that.
Yeah, the subtleties that they would have to become like super strong, super loud or something like that.
Yeah, and it's difficult to control your sticks when you start going at that higher dynamic level, especially for a grade 4 band with relatively inexperienced drummers.
Yeah, and then if you have, obviously a lead drummer playing, and then you have the other drummer, which essentially is the rest of the corps, trying to play corps parts, there's not a very good difference in 1 or 2 snare drummers playing, as opposed to having 7 snare drummers. The musical effect that they can contribute to, like coming in with 6 drummers versus the 1, say in corps parts, is a lot better to create a corps sound. You can stand right behind 2 snare drummers, and you pretty much get the whole gist of it. But you walk around a full corps, and you can hear how the sound really fills with the pipers. More drummers is better, obviously, to create a fuller sound.
Yeah, you're not increasing volume so much with adding 5 or 6 more drummers. If you have 2 drummers and they're both playing loud, it's going to sound like 2 drummers playing loud, and that doesn't balance.
The quality of sound can be definitely affected by 2 people having to play loud versus everybody playing nice and easy together.
Yeah. We usually tell them just to sound like a good 2 drummers, even if you're a little bit quiet. Sound like good 2.
So this idea of balance is something that's is a visual impact on you as the ensemble judge when they walk up to the line. It's like you look and see a big pipe corps and only 2 drummers in the back, or a huge midsection and the rest of it's relatively small. It's something that you're going to be listening for, and you're going to have to think through how you're going to what you're going to write on your sheet, and how are you going to weight in terms of your adjudication. How are you going to weight that into this business of tonal integration? How are you going to weight it? You've got to consider the whole, right? The ensemble judge should get around the whole circle just simply for the vantage points and the listening side of it. You've got to get around. Some very large bands and some of the venues we've got, it's difficult to do. And so it's a challenge for the ensemble judge to do this thing. Sometimes it's difficult to hear the whole when you're so close to one part. And so that's one of the challenges of being an ensemble judge. And I'm not sure how we're going to rectify that. A concert setting of a band would make it different. That way, if the band was on stage, let's say, and the judges were out in the audience, it would change the way we adjudicate. And if you put an ensemble judge at a distance from the band in a fixed position, that would change the way things were done too. The way it is now, we're not making those changes. We haven't had a concert-style competition, and we haven't had a fixed ensemble judge in our area. And so we are walking around, and so sometimes it's difficult to get around, and so that's an issue, and it's an issue you're going to have to weigh in as an ensemble judge. We're looking at the well, let me just say one thing. Look at the handout here under tonal integration at the very, very bottom. We've talked about these various components on it, the chanter pitches and the drones and this kind of thing, the drum pitch and so forth, the midsection, we've talked about that. But right in number 3 there it says balance, integration, blend. It's got the multi-star thing. So if you're the ensemble judge, then this issue of the balance and integration, the blend of all the cores, that's your task. You're the only one really listening for that, except for major occurrences that might happen, both positive way and a negative way for the piping and drumming judge. And so it's the integration of the inter-core tonal integration that you're responsible for.
Campbell?
Yeah.
Isn't there some overlap, though, between what an ensemble judge is listening for with the, when we're talking about pipes, snare drums, and midsection.
Yes.
But the drumming judge is listening for snare and midsection.
Right.
And so the whole drum corps.
That's correct.
So there's some overlap there.
There is
in terms
overlap.
of there are integration issues. There's musical, the scores that are written. Do they complement the pipes, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think there is overlap, but I think that the piping and the drumming judge can settle in to listen to the pipe corps and the drum corps to a greater degree than the ensemble has to be moving their ear around more. And so what I'm advocating is that the ensemble judge can't not do the integration of the three sounds, because that's there. I think that the integration of the three is going to go together, because obviously I think the drumming judge is listening to the melodies that are coming from the pipe corps and analyzing the drumming that's happening in terms of those melodies that are coming forward. I think the piping judge is listening to the pipe corps, and the drumming can't help but come through and be a part of it. It accents it, it adds dynamics to it, and so forth. So I think you can't escape not hearing the whole thing, but I think it's the ensemble judge's task to specifically pay attention to the overall blend of sound and the balance of sound, rather than get very involved with listening to the details of either the pipe corps or the drum corps.
Well, one of the things that's most challenging about that job is that ensemble judges have different backgrounds. There'll be those of us who've got piping backgrounds and those who've got drumming backgrounds. And what you have to avoid in ensemble is that you present the band with another piping sheet or another drumming sheet. And so you have to make sure that your ear is listening to all of the interaction that's going on so that doesn't happen.
Let's look at the second component, technical integration. So this is the execution. Once again, the intra-core unison is what we're looking at, okay? Between the core, the inter-core unison, that's what the ensemble's idea is. So the star that goes on it is between the cores, the unison, the technical playing, that is the primary responsibility of the ensemble judge. Of course, you can listen to the pipe corps and how it's acting, the drum corps and how it's acting, the midsection and what it's doing, but you're paying attention to the integration between the cores. That's the one thing that is your sort of charge. We've talked about introduction, the start of the set, the MSR, the medley, as it is. What might be some things different that the ensemble judge would be listening for that the piping or drumming judge might not be listening for so much?
The pipe corps and the drum corps both have the same opening tempo.
Watching the tempos from the rolls to the first part of the tune.
Just being able to comment more on both sides. Piping judge might be able to only only be able to comment on piping issues, or drumming judge obviously for drumming only. But the whole, being in front of the band to be able to hear, taking the whole, every aspect of the introduction, maybe the rolls, maybe the E. You can write, you can talk about both sections and how it affects the overall sound and the start of the performance, not just drones not coming in, and then as a piping judge you wouldn't be able to comment on some slow rolls or the ending roll that didn't finish together or something like that.
As the ensemble judge, you'd have that freedom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Things like how well I'm sure we've all had the experience where the tempos are slightly off between the cores, and so there might be a fall in tempo or an increase in tempo or just a separation in tempo. They started on the roll, they got going on the rolls, but then somehow either the pipe corps or the drum corps is either playing faster or slower, and so there's this separation, technical separation. So that would be something that you'd be looking for on the walk into the circle. You'd be paying attention to how everybody's playing, and are they maintaining the togetherness that you want for ensemble? That's what you're looking for. What about the transitions between the corps? What would something that the ensemble judge would hear when you transition, not between the corps, between tunes? What would the ensemble judge be paying attention to in terms of transitions that might be different or than the other two judges?
The arrangement of both the sections.
The arrangement of the sections, how the tune is arranged, and what technically might happen with that arrangement that you might be, obviously it could be very, very good, very, very excellent, very, very together, all three chords like right, operating driving with musical force, or they're not together. They're not knitted together, one or the other, or all three are operating slightly differently, or maybe technically they're doing something slightly different, maybe they're not complementary to each other. So maybe the rhythm that's being offered by the pipe section and one of the drum sections is different than the third one. You know, we got a different kinds of rhythm going on. I've seen this happen where the drum beating was somehow not complementary to the pipe tune technically. And so there's a kind of a mismatch. The drumming, they're playing it very, very well. The pipers are playing it very, very well, but it doesn't really kind of mesh together very tightly. And so that might be something that you would be commented on.
Also, so go ahead. On this almost comical, the bass drummer misses it, pipe corps and drum, but the drum corps get it, but the bass drummer misses it. Dum ba dee dee dum bum.
Yeah.
That happens.
Ken?
What was I going to say? We were talking about transitions. Oh, yeah, transitions and finish. You want all three corps to be kind of getting the same type of feeling across. So if the pipe tune is ramping up in terms of more and more drive, and the pipe section is really driving it, and the drum section, either the playing or the setting, doesn't have that same sort of building of tension towards the end, then they're really not integrating. It's more like musical integration, I guess. But you want the same kind of feel to be coming out of all the chords.
All the three operating on the same. Other comments about that, the transitions in particular?
You want the three chords to complement each other such that those transitions are easy. The score is written so that they can accomplish what they want to do. But more importantly, the drum corps midsection is enabling that pipe section to make a nice clean break from one tune to another, that there's not a run-on at the end of, for example, of a drum score or something like that, where the transition might be real fuzzy. So you want it to be nice and clean.
So the technical arrangement might be such that it's not yielding a smooth transition.
Maybe a pipe corps would play certain tunes or idioms in a way, and this might sort of go into musical integration, but certain drum movements go well with other pipe movements, and maybe they're playing everything as sort of each one is, but like you were saying, it's just not constructed right on paper, and the way that they play it does not match up with the same. So it's a pipe corps playing thing with a bunch of grips or something, and the snare drummers are playing something well, but not executing with the same sort of speed or something like that, to where it's not together.
They don't complement one another. It's like they're. Yeah, but there is this bleed over between the musical interpretation of it and what's technically there. It's not all distinctive. What about harmonies in terms of between the chords? What would you say about harmonies? What I'm thinking along these lines is if you're offering technical harmonies and you're is it possible to have too much? In other words, if we have a lot of harmonies going on in the pipe core, and we're adding a lot of snare on top of a lot of tenor voicing, can it build up, the technical arrangement build up too much where there's not enough space for anything to kind of be outstanding, and it becomes kind of a saturation rather than a chance for individual parts to pop up? That's what I'm looking at this, that's what I'm thinking of.
With the different layers of everything you can really put on there,
Mm-hmm.
between the bass and tenors, between the snare drummers, playing dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
different dynamic ranges, and harmonies that could be, you know, overlapping considerably, you know, 3 or 4 part harmonies. I mean, if people can get really crazy with it, but yeah, you might lose the melody line, which is essentially what's supposed to be holding everything together. People could sort of stray away from that, and it just becomes a lot of notes instead of one you know, technical.
So the timing of it, if you have multiple harmonies and multiple things going on in both the midsection and the snare core, that it's difficult to keep the technical integration of it because it's very complicated. All right. All right, these are some of Bob's suggestions, okay, judging suggestions. That pipers, if you're a piper, primarily a piper who is judging ensemble, that you might want to give a direct ear to the drums and an indirect one to the pipes, and that way you can be, the pipes, since you have a natural more proclivity to hear that and hear the nuances of it, that it may be easy for you, better for you to have a direct ear on the drum corps and be paying more close, kind of conscious attention on the drum corps and what's going on. And drummers, just the reverse of that. If you're primarily a drummer, that you might want to try listening to the pipe corps more directly, and you will probably hear the drum corps coming through. As you go and you're doing your workup, talk to yourself, change your focus, and sometimes changing your position does change your focus, so you can move around and change your focus. And sometimes I find myself, I've got to consciously talk to myself in the sense that sometimes I get caught up in trying to figure out what's going on, what I'm hearing, and what's going on that's causing my attention to go to that, whatever is going on. If it's a midsection thing, I'm trying to figure out, is it the pitch that's going on? Are they hitting the drum something? What is it that's attracting me to that in a positive way or a negative way? And I find myself that I have to stop the analysis and move myself to another position because I find myself getting absorbed by one thing rather than listening to the whole thing. You know what I'm trying to say there? Okay, so I could. So talking to yourself, moving yourself around, changing your focus, kind of keeps you on that overall big picture. The other way to do it, that's kind of like with the small parts. But the other way to do it is, instead of dealing with these little micro views of things, or you can back away from it and listen to the whole thing, you know, from time to time, and just hear it all together as one, and then that can be a very effective way to do it. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that big picture, that's the ensemble, and then so sometimes if you're moving yourself around and you're listening to little parts of it, you need to stand back and hear the whole thing too. And so where are you going to hear the whole thing? When are you going to hear this whole thing? Those are moments that you have to decide for yourself what you're going to do. Certainly, I think at the start of the set, at the introduction, you're sitting back, listening to the whole thing happen in front of you. And then as everyone gets in position and you get yourself around, you tend to be in the area you are. If this table's the circle and I'm standing on this part of the circle, then it's pretty clear I'm listening to this part of the circle more than on the other side. And as you move, it's going to change. But at some point, you want to back up and try and hear the whole as best you can. I've heard this idea of letting it wash over you from the top of the circle and hearing the drum come over the pipe corps, or go to the back of the circle and hearing the pipe corps come over the drum corps. These kinds of ideas are ways that you can kind of think of it. Also, the side view is one where it's an interesting thing as you transition from the pipe corps to the snare corps. Where is the optimum balance? In other words, where is almost like a stereo kind of effect, where the pipe corps is on one ear and the drum corps is on the other. When you position yourself, that gives you a different overview of the whole band on the right side and the left side. And so it's another point of view, another chance to hear the whole thing. Other comments on judging. I know that we have many experienced judges right here in this room, and it would be great for this DVD if you could offer some judging suggestions for the ensemble point of view. What's useful for you?
Where's your optimum place? Where would you think is the best place to stand, in your opinion, when you judge ensemble?
Would I judge ensemble?
If you could pin down one spot that would be the best point of view.
Well, in our association, it's the ensemble judge who has to communicate with the pipe major and let the pipe major know that it's okay to start. So it's the ensemble judge's job to make sure the piping judges are in position and the drumming judge is in position, everything's ready to go, and then you say, okay. So I tend to be on that right-hand side, and so that's where I tend to start. And so they come in, and so I tend to listen to the band come in from the right-hand side. But it's just a default of, I just talk to the person, and the person's usually in the right-hand front side of the band. That's where it typically is. From that point around, I'm just trying to get around. That's what I try to do. So I don't know. Like I say, I like to take the vantage point from different places, particularly for the midsection contribution. It's difficult to hear the midsection sometimes unless you go around to hear it. And I like to get around the pipe corps. Going around to be back by the drum corps is a good thing. You know, at least one lap around, that's what I like to try to do. If it's a quick march medley, it's not easy to do, okay? If it's a longer, you know, grade 1 medley, then obviously you've got a lot of time. But the circle's so big that it's difficult to get away far enough to hear the whole production because you're always close to one part of the band. What do some other people think?
I try to get around at least once, but I probably end up close to the middle on the side where I try to watch the drumming more. So that keeps my mind, the idea of, since I'm a piper, you know, give a direct ear and also your eyes to the drummers, because for me that helps me concentrate more and get away from just writing another piping score sheet. So I probably end up, you know, more on the side.
What's some others, Ed? What about you?
I like the side also, like you.
Yeah.
You can take it all in. Yeah. Drummers probably prefer to be in the back.
Well, yes and no. Well, as a drumming judge, I like to be in the back. I also like to go to the side because you can hear a little bit more from the whole drum corps. You can hear the tenor pitches better without them going through the entire snare line. You can see the hands of everybody who's doing what, and you can also make better, helpful suggestions. It's not about finding the weak link, it's about seeing technique problems and maybe why the sound isn't so good or why the sound is good, and be able to make helpful hints there. As a drum, I try to make at least one lap around the band as well. I like to listen to the bass drum through the pipes. Even as a drumming judge, I like to hear the drones, and I like to hear me humming to myself as I'm humming the drones, humming the bass drum, and making sure that they match up. So if you see me drumming, as a drumming judge, I will make at least one lap as well.
Lauren?
I've seen you walk quite far away from the band sometimes to hear the overall, particularly with one band when their harmonies were very, very unusual, and I couldn't hear the melody. I just had to stand quite far back to see what was going on to get the overall effect.
Okay. Other comments on that?
Yeah, one thing as far as suggestions go, I think it's especially important with ensemble. I've made myself do this over the last couple of years, is I write less. I started out when I was ensemble judging, I think I was probably buried in the minutia, and you're trying to comment on everything you hear. I finally found out it's kind of like backing off and listening to the whole band. I've made myself shorten up my sheets so that I say less, but I listen more. And that way, usually what I'm forcing myself to do is make comments that are pertinent to the overall sound. And if something jumps out, if some one particular thing happens, I'll note it. But really what I'm trying to do is keep my comments, while they're specific to an issue, I try to keep them more along the lines of what that entire band is doing and how those three sections are integrated. So I found that my head's not down and I'm paying attention to writing so much as I'm actually trying to spend more time listening.
It is a problem writing and listening at the same time. It is difficult. You're taking in an awful lot, and it's not easy. All right, in terms of score sheet writing, you can write constructive commentary as you go. A particularly useful suggestion for the lower grade bands. This is where you're trying to help them out. You're trying to be positive. You're trying to help them out. You're not doing point deductions per se. We don't have point deductions. Be aware of this ensemble fatigue. I know that with the timing on the bands, there's not a lot of time in between, and so when you get back to your seat and you're trying to finish up your sheet and you're trying to do a good job, a full job, that you end up writing up to the last minute and here comes the next band and you've got to put one sheet away and get out the next one and get ready to go. This can be very fatiguing, and it's too bad they can't give a little bit, tiny little bit of extra time for the ensemble judge to finish up. Because if you're trying to move your way around all the 3 cores as you should and get the big overview and write on 4 topics, not 3, it's just that little bit extra to do, and it can be very, very fatiguing. Having the flexibility of changing from ensemble judge to piping judge or ensemble judge to drumming judge on a 2-day contest is a huge plus, and it really is a different sheet and a different way of looking at it. And so it's not really surprising that we have kind of different sheets and different arrangements based on listening to something that's completely different. It's a different event almost, judging ensemble versus judging drumming versus judging piping. Okay, so we've talked about 2. We've talked about the tonal integration and the technical integration. And our viewpoint is trying to get, if you were just the tonal integration judge, or if you were just the technical integration judge, now you're the musical integration judge. And this is where probably the ultimate decision is made, okay, for ensemble judging. And the biggest contributor to it is the snare, bass, tenor dynamics. Okay? That's the single biggest thing that adds to the musical integration overall, all right? So expression and phrasing within each core, okay, because you're still listening to the integration within the cores, but also between the cores. That's the between the cores. This is the intra versus the inter. This is the game you're playing. Of course you're doing intra, but inter is your specific task, and that's what you have to keep kind of going back to on every single topic. You keep going back to it. You want the idea of complementary versus contradictory expression and dynamics between the cores. So sometimes you're playing kind of melodically together, and sometimes you're offering some sort of a contradictory expression, some sort of syncopation that kind of contrasts to it. So you can be playing in rhythm, and then sometimes you go to a syncopation. Piping is playing along, and then the drumming is offering dynamic range next to it. Okay, those are the types of things that you're looking for. The kind of three aspects of rhythm. Rhythm, 3 basic ideas are: 1, the basic definition is sort of a regular pulsation, regular, strong, weak emphasis in the melody. Okay, so the pipers might be offering a regular, strong, weak melody in a march, let's say, and the drummers are playing in a complementary fashion to that. They're following that, they're supporting that, they're offering a drive to that. Then they may go to some sort of the pipers are playing that rhythm, and the drummers may be offering changes in dynamic range, okay, which offer a different kind of rhythmic support to the drummers. So rather than playing along together in unison, as it were, now they're offering some sort of changes in dynamics, okay? That offers a different way to vary the rhythm. And then the third way is if the pipers are playing along in one pattern, rhythmic pattern, if the drummer is doing a syncopation with it. And so then it's kind of emphasizing the weak beat instead of the strong beat. Okay? Those are the kinds of things that we're looking for in terms of the expression and dynamics between the core in a rhythmic sense. We've talked about the rhythm a little bit.
Sorry, Ken.
Yeah.
As far as the drumming dynamic range, another thing to look at that some pipers may not realize is that the quality of sound of the drummers going higher or lower sometimes diminishes. But, it's a lot harder to control your sticks as you go a lot louder or a lot quieter. So if they go there just because they think they can, is one thing, but
Yeah.
if they make it sound good as well as go in there and supporting the melody musically. That's something I always look for when you're doing the dynamic.
Another comment I'd like to put in regard to that is if, in terms of dynamic range, it seems like the drum corps tend to play at a level, sort of a medium level, and then try to go louder, but they don't realize that there's a soft level that they can double their range, as it were, if they just drop and then go up. Instead, they're kind of medium strength, and then they try to go louder, and it just makes it difficult. If they went soft even and then came back to the medium, that would be better.
And both, like I said, both ends are difficult. Sometimes they drop to 6 so low, they're not getting the rebound off the drum anymore.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how the technique to make that happen.
Yeah.
Or if they hit too hard, they get too much rebound and they can't control it to get it back down in time, so you get some harsh roll sounds because they can't control the buzzes or the bounces at that level. Or they can't get the 6 back down in time, so they end up slowing down, getting kind of labored in their playing. So sometimes that dynamic range will end up slowing down because they try to play too loud, they can't control their sticks. Or the sound disappears because the sticks stop moving, they can't get them going again.
Okay. Tempo is another thing. When we're making the tempos, we've got to all stay together on the tempos, and so when we have these changes or